Good afternoon, everybody. I'm seeing the participant numbers dial up, which is always exciting to see that going up. We have a great discussion talking about planned giving. So,
great. Well, and Luke, as you get ready to get started, let me thank you. Everyone, I'm Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director at Episcopal Parish Network. So pleased to have you all joining us today, have this great panel from our partner CCS Fundraising. We're thrilled to have such a terrific turnout, registration of over 100 folks who wanted to hear more about planned giving, which is I was talking with our panelists about is one of the most important things that parishes, cathedrals, can be talking about today as this greatest transfer of generational wealth is taking place. So thank you for joining us as attendees, and thank you to our panelists. I know they're looking forward to engaging with you. And Luke, if you want to take it from here, we will get started.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you for all the work that you do from an education point of view and information point of view and offering sessions like this. So we're just thrilled to be here today and also joined by two very talented colleagues. And we're going to be talking about planned giving and particularly at the parish level and how we can do that better, and going to give you some tools and resources. So a brief introduction myself. I'm Luke Driscoll. I'm one of the managing directors and partners at CCS. I work out of our Washington, DC office, and I've done a lot of work over the past 20, 25 years working with seminaries and churches and other organizations. Also joined here today by Angel Flores, who's one of our senior VPs. She has worked with campaigns from 20 million to over 2 billion. So she's worked with a lot of different types of campaigns. She leads our gift planning team at CCS and works across all our different teams to coordinate education, events, client services around this particular area. And rounding off the team is Christopher Dake, who's one of our VPs, and in addition to serving with Angel on that team at CCS of gift planning, also is a very seasoned campaign manager and does a lot of work on his campaigns, doing gift planning, incorporating that as a primary strategy. So glad to have everybody here join us today. Just a brief commercial on CCS, and you can kind of see what's on the screen, but we would be the largest by far of the different fundraising firms, 350 professional fundraising staff, and actually closer to over 500 in total staff. We work with several hundred nonprofit organizations a year. That goes from individual churches to organizations like the Smithsonian and Habitat for Humanity. We've worked in this space in the Episcopal sector for almost 42 years now. I think this coming year will be 43. And we've been working very closely with Joe and even some of Joe's predecessors working with the Episcopal Parish Network and before the SEEP Network. So really thrilled to do this. And we also have had some dedicated, what we call content cabinet on the Episcopal Church, where we look at topics that would be unique to this space. Just kind of looking a little at some historical partnerships, and I think historical, so we decided to go with the artsy black and white photos. But here's just a selection of some of the churches that we've worked with in dioceses and also seminaries. So please know, anybody who's listening to phone, your church could be up here soon, just call us. So we're very thrilled with our engagements. They've been very successful, and we really have enjoyed every single one of those. And so we have a wide variety of experience, as you can see, with all different types of churches. And as we kind of talk a little bit, we'll slide into talking about charitable giving itself overall. So you can kind of see here, these are the different charts that break this down. There's a report called Giving USA, and it comes out annually, and it's a look at philanthropy in the US. It always is looking back at the previous calendar year. So when we get to sort of the mid to late spring in CCS, the report comes out, and it's, so for example, the 22 report is looking back at the previous year, looking at those 2021 numbers. And so the overall money that was given to philanthropy and giving to charitable causes last year in 2021 was $484.85 billion with a B dollars. So truly an impressive amount of generosity in the US. As you look at where the money goes to, so we look at the different recipients, you can see the breakdown here. So religion, faith-based causes is still the number one sector by far. Now, as the country's gotten a bit more secular over the years, so I've been in fundraising for over 30 years. When I first started out, these numbers were probably in the low to mid 30s. So it has kind of slowly ticked down a little bit over the past couple decades, but still by far, as you can see, very, very significant. So that is an important thing in terms of where people are giving. They're usually going to be starting with their church, their congregation in terms of their support. If we want to come talk a little bit about our discussion topics today, so talk a little bit about the what. So what is gift planning culture? What does it mean? How do we establish that? As far as the who, so it's some insights for you and things that would apply for both, whether it's an individual church, a really large church, an organization. So again, a lot of these things are scalable. There's always, in terms of a plan, there's things you can do. As Joe talked a little bit earlier, we were kind of talking a little bit about this transfer of wealth in the United States over the next probably 10 or 20 years. So it's the importance of how do we look at some of these asset-based fundraising issues and how do we address them? And that's what we talk a little bit about today, is how we can actually do that. So Chris and Angel will be taking us into that. With that, I think I want to transfer it over in terms of, we'll go to our next slides. And we're going to go into gift planning culture. So I will turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Luke. I'll jump in. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be with you all. So we're going to just dive into the first topic, and that is the what. And the what is gift planning culture. And we've got the definition up there, and I'll let you read that. But really, for me, it's about one word, and that word is commitment. Commitment is, of course, paramount when discussing, our faith and sharing our values, and really gift planning is a similar commitment to fundraising, and it's very intentional. That's a word I'm going to be using in the next couple of slides. Very specific to a donor, and specifically raising money beyond cash. And so let's just jump into the next slide, because the next slide jumps into our next topic. Look at how much progress we've made already. We're on the second topic. The why, and why is gift planning important? There's 4 areas I'd like for us to think about. And the first one, of course, is most wealth is not held in cash. If you think about what your personal wealth is, maybe you own a house, your retirement funds, your pension funds, that's usually more than what you're giving away in terms of your bills and the things that you spend cash on. If we go clockwise, we'll talk about donor-advised funds continuing to grow in popularity. Now, donor-advised funds are just a giving vehicle where people get immediate tax breaks and then can tell the organization, whether that's Fidelity or a general community foundation, where to take those grants. And to put this in perspective, last year, donor advised funds, or DAFs as we call them, gave out about $35 billion of grants last year. And to put that in perspective, in 2015, that number was $14 billion. If we go down to over time, deferred gifts, maintain or build out increased annual giving. This allows for more cash gifts when possible. And then finally, people are more willing to give from their assets. And, that's just to say an example. It's, hey, I don't have cash, but I have this land. Maybe I could donate it to the church. And what factors are contributing to the increase of gift planning? Luke mentioned it a little bit. Joe mentioned it at the top. The wealth transfer, $64 trillion. I can't even $64 trillion will transfer by the year 2030. And so roughly a little bit more than $5 trillion every year will change from one generation to the next. And really, we're seeing organizations that make growth, parishes, churches. We see that growth take place when they invest in a gift planning program. The pandemic, I can't tell you that so many people, all of us, have faced life end of life situations, Creating wills, thinking about what your legacies are, thinking about creating trusts, that's also driving this. Nonprofit sophistication, nonprofits are generally seeing an increase engagement in this type of fundraising. And they're building out the resources in order to support it fully. Donor sophistication, donors are understanding more of what they can do with their assets. Again, it goes back up to that earlier moment where we talked about DAFs. And then if you take all four of these areas, this just really allows the increased opportunity for deepening the culture, which we talked about before. It increases the intentionality, and it increases the specific relationship building. So let's go to the next slide. Now let's take a quick look at what common planned gifts that donors have used over the past year. Bequests are still the best. So we'll focus a little bit on that. In fact, you can't spell bequest without the letters B-E-S-T. And that will be the only bad joke that I will say today. But Luke had mentioned at the top, philanthropy topped out at almost $485 billion in 2021. 46 billion of that was given by bequests. And that chart to the right really shows you in comparison to roughly about a half a dozen other gift vehicles. Some things to think about when you're talking about bequests. The average age donors make a will is 44. And then the average age of donors that add a charitable beneficiary is around 53, usually when they have their first grandchild. And just a quick note, if I can do a quick plug here. If you look to the right, immediately to the right, and of course Angel is smiling because she knows what I'm going to talk about here, the retirement plan is at 30%. And just a few months ago, CCS developed an essay about the hidden opportunities that are in retirement plans. There's about $39 trillion worth of assets in the United States in retirement market. And hopefully we'll send everybody a link. One of the writers is very talented, very knowledgeable about this specific topic, but it's just an opportunity really if you're looking to sophisticate your gift planning. Retirement plans are where it's at. So let's move to the next slide. And we're moving on to the next topic, the who. And the who is you and your parishes. Now we have a list. I'm not going to go through all of the list, but I'm going to highlight 3 points. If you look at the third point there, it unveils untapped donor potential. This is data. And data is paramount in terms of what you can find. Working with a client that had sent out about 200 emails, got 82 responses in terms of just responding to a plan giving survey. If you go down a little bit further, you see prioritizes work for fundraisers. When you have data, that really gets you to focus on exactly what you need to do. As we like to say, it provides clarity. And then finally, towards the bottom there, it creates efficiencies. So if you have data and you have sort of a plan, that plan needs to be efficient. And really, it goes back to what does gift planning do? It creates the need for intentionality. So let's go to the next slide. Some key considerations while you're thinking about, well, what can I do with a gift planning program, or the beginning of understanding what it would take to do a gift planning assessment. Do you have the resources to do something that assesses your opportunities in this area? And an important thing to consider is who puts together your fundraising programs. Is it, are the people or the person or the people willing to take this next step, this beyond cash? A lot of people need cash, but this really allows for further fundraising beyond cash. And are you working on a strategic plan? And how can an assessment be a part of that? So when you're thinking about a strategic plan, how can gift planning and an assessment within that gift planning help you flush that out even more? And of course, as we've been long partners of the EPN and do you need to bring in a partner or some professional outside help to make it possible? And so let's take it to the next slide. So if you're thinking about like, well, okay, Chris, so when should we actually take the dive into the deep end? And I just have a few suggestions here. Maybe when you're launching a new program or new ministry, maybe in an example that you've seen an increase of families, or excuse me, of a demographic in your area, increase of those families, that gives you an opportunity to serve, right? Embarking on a major capital campaign, you're renovating or building your church. Perhaps maybe you need to grow out your endowment. Planning for the future, it's important to shoring up your fundraising sustainability, and building out a strategic plan. Again, you know, if you're working on something that says, hey, look, we're renting a facility, or we have issues, we have gaps in our volunteer leadership. So we're building out a strategic plan. Let's think about how gift planning can really be at the beginning of this rather than something that you add on in terms of a fundraising strategy. And then you're aiming to grow. You know, perhaps you see a rise in young families, and need to build out your family support ministries or your youth program. So these are just different areas to think about, like how can gift planning help our parish, help our church, help our congregants, build that kingdom of God. And so before I turn it over to my colleague Angel, we went over the what, the why, and the who. And now Angel is going to talk to you about the how. Angel?
Thank you very much, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So everything that Luke and Chris have shared, hopefully is, for some of you may be new information, for others of you might be, recalling conversations or things that you've read in the past. Ultimately, what all of this information boils down to is that there is a role for gift planning to be a part of your fundraising program in some capacity. So what we hope you take away from today's conversation is one, maybe two things that you can go back and implement right away. I'll walk you through now just essentially how CCS conducts this work when we're working with our different client partners. And again, we work with single parishes, we work with dioceses, we work with very large higher ed institutions. So we're familiar and comfortable taking this work, and as Luke mentioned, scaling it based on who we're working for. So I will attempt to do that quickly through these slides as I take you through our process. We do always begin with data. There's a way to do this looking at your own giving data that can be very simple. We obviously, and much like a planned giving strategy, it can get very complex. So again, it's up to you how much complexity you wish to dig into. We'll also look at timeline and benchmarks for assessing your program. We'll talk a little bit about donor engagement and some best practices, both in terms of communicating directly with your donors and your parishioners, but also how to steward them, right? And looking long term, just to underscore what Christopher shared in terms of what we see in terms of annual giving from donors who have made specifically a legacy or deferred gift, is that we do see an increase in their annual giving, right? So there's definitely an upside there. And then ultimately resourcing, right? What are the resources that you will need to review your program? What are some external resources that you can look to bring in and start to codify just to help you in your journey? So in terms of data analysis, as I mentioned, there are two approaches to how we might look at this. The first is what's called an RFM data scoring, stands for recency, frequency, and monetary. So essentially how recent has the donor given? How frequently do they give over a period of time that you can determine? And ultimately, then the total amount of their giving, right? So looking at their giving in total throughout their history with the parish. You can see there on the right-hand side, we have a QR code. So if you want to take your phone, and you'll get, I believe, these slides after the fact, but if you want to take your phone now, open up your camera, train it on that QR code there on the right, tap that on your screen, it'll pull up a video done by one of our colleagues, one of our data analytics gurus, and guide you through that process. You'll also want to, if you aren't already tracking additional information to help with, again, just giving you more specifics to narrow the field in terms of who to talk to, who to prioritize in your conversations, there's some suggestions here in that middle box there. So certainly want to take a look at the donor's involvement as a volunteer and how long they've been doing that. We also want to get a sense of age. Again, plan giving is not just for retirees. There is some element of a plan giving program that is relevant for folks in their 30s and 40s and their 50s, and then of course in retirement. We also want to understand both the marital status and the heir status, right? So if someone is married, if they are a widow or widower, if they've never been married, if they have been married twice, just helpful to know and understand, again, the family dynamic, because ultimately we are asking these donors, our parishioners, to consider the parish or the diocese as part of their estate plan in some way, right? And the main goal of an estate plan is to care for families. So, and in terms of being added to that conversation, we just want to understand what the situation might be. And then ultimately any wealth screen that you might be doing or might have done recently. Typically we encourage our client partners to update this information about every 2 years. You don't need to do it much more often than that, but it is helpful to get a sense again, and really it's more directional. So just give you some guidance on where to start to focus additional research and then initiate conversations.
And Angel, I think I'll just share as somebody who's done lots and lots of parish campaigns over the years. The nice thing about this is because most people are giving pretty regularly, to the church. You have a lot more data than, for example, if any of us were, donors to the local food bank or Habitat for Humanity or the Y, you name it. We may give, sometimes annually, sometimes sporadically, sometimes we might give when we're asked, a friend is on the board. So the nice thing about this data is you're able to look at it in sort of several years. So for those of you who are thinking about either doing campaigns or in general, just maybe looking at stewardship and increasing your annual giving, you're able to see those trend lines, in terms of, are people increasing their giving? Are they stepping it up regularly? Is it flat? And sometimes the reason why giving is flat is simply because we haven't asked folks to do more. So the data is really helpful you don't need to be sort of a super whiz like Chris and Angel are to look at that. And I'm an English major. I can follow up and down and flat. So everybody can do that. So I think that's just one thing it's nice for us in this space.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luke. And I know there's some questions coming through the chat, so please keep them coming and we will address them. So after you've reviewed your data, you get a sense of, who your top 25 or 50 donors or families are that you want to engage in conversations about their giving and expanding their giving to your parish or to your diocese. Then we talk about implementation. So understanding that, most of you are probably an army of one when it comes to fundraising in your institution. I want to encourage you that there are meaningful steps that you can take, even if you can devote, only 1 to 2 to 3 hours a week. It's just being very, as Chris mentioned, very intentional about how you're using that time and having a plan with that time over an extended period. So we suggest breaking down your implementation timeline into these 3 phases. So the first is immediate priority. So within the next 12 months, where do you want to apply your time, effort, and energy? Think about who within your parish or within your diocese should be brought into the conversation with regard to assessing your plan giving program, because you want to start to build that buy-in early, particularly from the leadership, right? That's when we look at some of our clients, again, historically, and then also with an eye towards the future, the organizations who have successful plan giving programs are those where the leadership is fully bought in, fully supportive, both in terms of their own philanthropy, but in just understanding the resourcing that such a program will require. We also want to understand, what is the information that we can get from the assessment, and particularly from current donors. So if you think it makes sense for you to speak to a handful of your top donors, just give them a sense of what you're wanting to do, it can be really informative, right? Understanding what other organizations they give to, how many of those organizations they might have made a legacy gift to. You might even uncover in those conversations that they have included your parish or your diocese in their estate plans and just haven't told you. So that gives you some more insight to go on. And then the second phase in terms of implementation would be near-term growth. So in years, post 12 months up to 24 months, what are we looking at, right? What new strategies are you going to put into place? We encourage all of our nonprofit partners to start small. It's a big elephant we're trying to eat here. So we just want to be methodical and intentional about the steps that we're taking so that we are moving ahead at a pace that encourages and brings along everyone that we need with us, because this is as much a new program that you might be implementing or a refresher of your current program as it is culture change for some folks in your organization. We also ensure that we are empowering in that mid timeline there, empowering staff and volunteers to be able to participate in the effort, right? So what are some individual goals that you can set up for your volunteers and staff? What are the collaborative goals? And make them so that they are, really a testament to generosity, right? So if you have more than one fundraiser and they collaborate on a blended proposal to a donor, give them both the credit for that gift, right? No need to parse it into percentages. Just make it easy for everybody. And then long-term sustainability, again, starting with the data and the metrics, understanding early on how is it that you plan to gauge the growth and success of your program. Again, are you simply looking to increase the number of legacy commitments, of bequests specifically? Do you feel like you have a good handle on bequests, so now you want to engage perhaps in building up your gift annuity program? Or are you looking to add donors to your legacy society? Understanding from the outset which data points you're going to be tracking and which you want to meet and what that will require will help you, again, build in the steps that you need to reach that long-term success. Also helpful around year 3, as you're taking stock of your program, to check to see which areas might need more support, right? This might be a good time to have a conversation about additional resourcing or maybe shifting some resources around so that you can bring in additional fundraisers. And then ultimately considering that there are a lot of options in terms of additional resources to help improve your program. There are firms that manage marketing. There are firms that manage sort of global AI-powered cultivation tools. I mean, again, when Chris spoke about the sophistication of the nonprofit sector, it is quite impressive. Some of the tools that exist to help you both connect with your parishioners in terms of their philanthropy, and also better understand how they're thinking about your parish.
I think the one thing I would just share, Angel, for everybody is, even though, at a parish level, just as we have somebody who's a stewardship chair, a lot of times it's just putting this to paper or typing into the computer and pulling it out, and like all things, just recording and measuring those things. So it doesn't need to be, even though there's a lot of other sophisticated things, a lot of it is just being aware of the information. So if we have a legacy society, how many people are in it? And we're encouraging more people to join. And that's just when you're doing the annual meeting and other things, it's reporting this out, the plan giving, the legacy giving, any different phrasing we want to use. It's making that yet another piece of information people are used to hearing. And we're building on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luke. And we'll underscore that with some pretty interesting data from a fairly recent report from a collection of legacy donors. In terms of metrics and benchmarks, again, this is going to be, as you might imagine, fairly personalized for every parish and every diocese. What's important is to understand the consistency that will be needed in tracking these, and that you have a system that is easy to track, or at least that you figured out well enough to be able to track this information consistently. So some examples here, counting, we'll start at the top left there and work our way around clockwise. So counting blended gift requests and commitments, right? So a blended gift request is essentially any gift request that includes more than one option, right? So maybe it's for your annual giving campaign as well as for a bequest, or it's for your major gift campaign, your annual giving campaign, and another deferred gift option. And the idea here is that you're looking at both short-term and long-term investments from your donors, and also making sure that they understand that there's a variety of assets other than cash that can be used to fund those gifts. That's really important because a lot of folks don't realize that they have assets that can be made donation relevant. So again, to underscore Luke's point, it's just constant education here. You also want to be able to quantify your outreach and donor identification efforts, right? If you are connecting with new parishioners, and want them to follow up with them in a period of time, how are you keeping track of that in your database? You do want to make it consistent, especially if you identify someone with potential, that you are connecting with them, not just only in terms of their giving, but other ways to get involved with the parish, right? Other volunteer opportunities, because you are looking to build and deepen that personal relationship, so that it just makes the giving conversation that much easier. You also want to commit to professional development and ongoing education for the staff, and I would argue as well as the leadership to the extent that you're able. There are so many free resources available, plenty on our website as well as some others, whether you're looking for information specific to blended proposals, or how best practices for legacy giving societies, or how to build a gift annuity program. Just making sure, again, that the educational component is consistent and ongoing, because we do find that there is a pretty considerable education and information gap when it comes to plan giving programs. As I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you are encouraging shared credit amongst all of your fundraisers. If you happen to be lucky enough to have more than one or more than someone other than yourself. And again, it's encouraging that collaboration that will make everyone more successful ultimately, and provide a better experience for the donors, which is the ultimate goal. Be sure to establish solicitation goals for each fundraiser and each parish, right? You can do it by quarter. It's usually the easiest way to start tracking. Or you could do it, for every 6 months, certainly for every year, and have a sense of what that means for you. So just as an example, we worked with an organization, a hospital foundation, fairly recently, and they had a goal of reaching a certain number of solicitations where a bequest was included in the request. And because they had that goal and they gave themselves a year to reach it, and then they looked at what it would mean quarterly and what would it mean by fundraiser, they were able to not only reach but surpass that meeting goal. And for those of you who worked with CCS, you probably have often heard us speak about the focus on the activity. Focus on the activity and the dollars will come. As a result of this hospital foundation's work, they were able to realize a 300% increase in their documented bequest gifts in 1 year. So we know that there's an incredible amount of opportunity here, and it's just a matter of putting, again, the steps in place, the path in place, and then just move forward, step by step, to get to your goals. And then ultimately, if you are in the midst of a campaign or you're planning a campaign, we highly, highly recommend including these plan giving goals as part of your larger goals, right? So, and think about breaking it down not only for deferred gifts, those gifts that will more than likely be realized after the campaign period, but gifts that will be realized in the short term that might be funded through assets other than cash, like qualified charitable distributions from an IRA, or appreciated securities, or perhaps even real estate, as Luke mentioned at the top. So with that, we'll move on to our next point about resourcing. So thinking about this in 3 different buckets, right? We're looking at what it will take in terms of staffing, leadership, and then of course volunteers. And you might find that these will they will sort of ebb and flow, right? Your needs for them, and how much both you need and also can apply in terms of resourcing for these areas. So thinking about your staff, again, I encourage all of you to, if you, again, are lucky to have a staff, what does the staff need to feel supported, to be successful? And that includes for yourself, right? What additional resources do you need? Is it additional training on your CRM so that you can feel really confident about the data that you're inputting, as well as exporting through reports? Is it additional professional development? Are there so many conferences, plan giving specific conferences that I'm sure are in each of your general regions, that could be beneficial to attending. I find that the plan giving community is incredibly kind and generous with their advice and support and counsel. So highly encourage you getting involved in your local councils as well. And just generally speaking, are there systems that can make your work more effective, right? I spoke earlier about some AI-powered cultivation tools that might be an option for you, even if it's for a very short or discrete amount of time. And then in terms of leadership, are they advocates for you in this work? Do they really understand the implications of this work for your parish, for your diocese? Do they understand it from a personal level, right? Do they themselves have estate plans? Do they have wills? For those that do, having this conversation will be much easier. For those that don't, it's an opportunity, right, to discuss with them what it means, both for their own financial security and that of their families, and for the parish or the diocese. And then for volunteers, sort of building on what you've done with staff and leadership before then, how engaged are they? Do they need specific training? Are you using and relying on volunteers to engage some of your donors in these conversations? And if you are, and I hope you are, then they are probably more than likely going to need some additional training. That is something that we have found in our work with clients when we are assessing their plan giving programs, that training and ongoing training, even if it's just through weekly meetings, as well as discrete and organized and training sessions, vastly increase the confidence of both fundraisers and volunteers, just that they understand sort of the mechanics behind this work, and then can relate it for themselves to the donors. And that's where it's really important that they understand for themselves what this work means.
Maybe Angel, just everybody on the phone, Angel's probably like one of the smartest people in our entire space talking about this stuff, so I will make her blush a little bit because she's worthy of all that. But you also have to remember, even at the parish level, something as simple as please remember Holy Trinity, in your planning and your estate planning and other means, just literally posting those words in appropriate places on the website and material, and saying that even that alone, just that regular consistent piece is so vitally important. So as much as we can run the scale of like super sophisticated, literally just making sure we're doing, like all things in life, it's what are the minimum things we can do, and then from a resource and a time point of view, what can we do to be better and then best? So just as a reminder, because I know a lot of times some folks could be hearing this and going, hey, it's just me and I'm going to be doing this in my whatever limited spare time. There's always things you can do where there's a minimum benchmark, and then incrementally, is it a time or money resource to do more? So I just wanted to throw that out.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you for reminding us about that. So on our next slide, we have a couple more resources to consider. And, and I think, Luke, you bring up a great point, because there, as I mentioned, right, plan giving can be incredibly complex. It can't be as complex as you want it to be, but it can also be quite simple. And part of that is finding ways to support the work that becomes somewhat automatic. So I love Luke's reminder to just include language about remembering the parish or the diocese wherever you can, even in an annual appeal letter, certainly on your website, thinking about where it could be in bulletin or other publications from the organization. Two other options in terms of resources, an advisor network. And again, this could be as part of your engagement with your local plan giving or regional plan giving council, but also just generally a great opportunity to engage with your leadership, right? Who are they using for estate planning? Who are they using for tax planning and financial planning? And start to build that list of resources, not only to support your program and your work, but for any donors that might need those resources, that might not have, might not know where to start, essentially. And you can share that list with confidence to say, here's a list of resources that our board or, the lay leadership have utilized, not recommending any one person, but, just to get you started. Can be a huge help. And I will say, for those that might have, a significant population of their parish or a growing population of their parish that, is, considered, within the BIPOC community, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that one piece specifically, providing professional advising resources, will be a huge step forward to helping them understand and get their affairs in order so that they can ultimately support the parish and the diocese more meaningfully. And then professional partners. Obviously, we're biased. We love doing this work. It's really exciting to see how how organizations really do blossom in this work, because it's can be overwhelming, but I would like to think that over the past number of years, we've found ways to work with parishes and dioceses to demystify plan giving to a certain extent, and ultimately to right size it for the organization, to make it digestible and really become part of the culture, because that again is where we will see long-term success. So it's important to think about any external partners that you might need for any aspect of this work, whether it's the assessment piece, or if you have an established program and there's certain aspects you want to tweak, there's no shortage of options here. And you can see there listed some of the different areas in which you might look to bring in some additional and outside expertise to help with your program. So then one quick note, and Luke had actually referenced this earlier in the conversation about donor engagement. And this is, to my mind, one of the most exciting aspects of being and working in the nonprofit space. It's just the sheer impact you have on individuals. And then, say given your role then as, working within parishes and dioceses, that, takes it up even more. But again, based on a report that was published a couple of years ago, we learned that 41% of donors who have made a planned or rather a deferred or legacy gift to their charity of choice actually first learned about it from their nonprofit, from their charity. They don't necessarily hear about it from their financial advisor or planner or their estate planner. It's not that professional advisor's role, but that is a really important space that you can offer to your parishioners. And I would encourage you, again, if you do nothing else, to think about how you can engage your donors and thinking about long-term financial planning. Actually, in a project that we've just recently wrapped up with the diocese in Brooklyn, one of our recommendations is to hold regular financial planning workshops where that's the sole purpose of the conversation, right? That's just what those sessions exist to do. And it's open to the parishes. Parishioners can come, they can bring their families. They're recruiting financial advisors that are from the community, so that if there is language or cultural concerns, hopefully that will be sort of ameliorated by those connections. But I think being in a position to be able to build wealth for families, to build intergenerational wealth in some cases, is really incredible. And as parishes and dioceses, you're especially in an especially important position to do so. Ultimately, for looking high level for donor engagement, there's these 4 areas of focus to stay top of mind, right? What is the impact of the donor's gift? What is the impact on the mission of the parish, the diocese writ large? Where can you personalize communications, right? Thinking back to those ages, right? Can you focus on a financial planning workshop for families and parishioners in their 30s and 40s, right? That looks very different if they're working, they're building their wealth, they're having families, they're purchasing homes, hopefully. It's really important for them to get their ducks in a row versus retirees who have a different set of concerns, but again, financial planning no less important. And then ultimately, though you might hear otherwise or may want to move away from snail mail, it still continues to be very important. I know it can be a challenge when it comes to addresses, particularly during the pandemic when we had a lot of shifting around. But to the extent that you can find ways just to keep those addresses updated in your database, it will continue to be an important part of any plan giving program for the foreseeable future. And then just to close out on donor engagement, again, for those of you who've been fundraising for some time, this graphic will not be a surprise to you, right? But I think just a helpful reminder that we're looking for that very unique space that our donors fill, where they understand how their giving can be made to support the parish or the diocese, that they also see the impact of their gift or their giving to your parish, to your diocese, and that they ultimately are then provided with opportunities to connect with other donors and with leadership, and that they're open to meeting, right? That they've opened that door to you. Not to be deterred if someone doesn't, it might just take a little more time or a different person or slightly longer strategy. But again, finding that nexus where those 3 things intersect to then initiate conversations. And with that, I'll pass it back to Luke to get to your questions.
Great. We had some good questions in there. Hopefully I'll capture everything. And if not, as I said, we'll certainly can follow up with things across the board. I know one of the folks had said at the beginning, Chris mentioned some technical terms. What's a DAF? That's just fundraiser, jargon, but it's donor advised funds. So I think isn't it last year that they just went over 1 million donor advised funds have been set up now, I think, across the country?
Yes, I forget the exact stat, but it is a large number. In fact, we're seeing a much faster growth in DAFs as compared to family foundations because they are easier to set up with essentially the same sort of working model for donors.
Right, and Chris posted in the chat a nice little article about donor advised funds, but there's also even in that space. So as Angel just said, instead of setting up the Flores Family Foundation, and maybe having to go through the legal setup of actually creating a family foundation, the idea of housing it at one of these large financial institutions still allows you to do all the same, typically the same intent of what you'd like to do, which is fund charitable causes and different things. So that's really going to be for a smaller percentage of your donors, but some of those more affluent ones who could make really big transformational gifts. So, I think this is one of those exercises. So you want to be working both the wide view, we want to get everybody to participate in this, because in a lot of cases, this might be a way for somebody who doesn't have a lot of individual sort of cash on a regular basis in their estate. They can make a much larger gift. And that's why they talk about gift planning. So if I was going to come and talk to Mr. Dake and say, hey, have you ever thought about what you might want to do with the money from, your estate, or if you have any special assets, is there any special things you might want to do for the parish? And a lot of times people have never thought about that. And sometimes the financial advisors will do the same thing as they're looking at people's plans and saying, hey, are there any special things you'd like to do? There is another statistic that talks about I think it's something like 70% or even as much as even 80%, when an organization finds out about a planned gift or, an estate gift, is when the attorney calls and says, oh, Christ in St. Luke's, just letting you know, Mr. Driscoll passed away and he left, $100,000 for the parish, which is wonderful. The only thing that's a shame is, since we didn't know about it, we weren't able to thank Mr. Driscoll, more directly while he was still with us. It also allows us to sort of hold up Mr. Driscoll as being a donor who took that extra step. And so these are some of the things in terms of building a program, having things like a legacy society that would be important. Mm-hmm. In terms of, there was a couple other questions about, maybe Chris, I'll throw this to you. Somebody said, if a lot of people are doing their planning when they're in their 40s or 50s, how do we talk to donors who are in their 70s or 80s about making a gift?
Thanks, because that's the one I wanted to answer. So thank you.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, what's really great about planned giving is that, let's say that you get a bequest, like we went over what the bequests look like, and you get somebody to give you the language, and they said they're going to give you $10,000 in their will from their estate. Well, it's very important, and again, this goes back to intentionality. It's very important to steward these people. That if you think about, it's always easy to ask people for money on an annual basis or even a capital campaign. And then if they pay over 5 years, you have opportunities to update them, et cetera, et cetera. But when you get someone to give you a planned gift and specifically about their wills, it's imperative for you to maintain and deepen that relationship, because people in their 70s and 80s will not be keeping the same organizations that they might have put in their 40s and 50s. And so questions that you can ask, people will never give everything to either organization. And as we talked about, with churches being such a predominant and important philanthropic choice for people, you have an advantage to have a conversation with people to ensure that people in their 70s and 80s have that opportunity to give you something very meaningful in their will. So don't be discouraged. Have the conversation with the idea that you don't know, or if you do know, can you have a conversation about where could the church possibly be a part of that? And just remember, life changes from the time over the course of your life. So don't be afraid to engage that conversation. So thank you. I wanted to answer that.
And I want to there's a bunch of things, so I'm trying to go fast and furious, lightning round here. So people talk about deferred giving, blended giving, planned giving, legacy giving. A lot of those things are kind of synonyms for each other, but I think one way to kind of think about it is, when you talk about a planned or deferred gift, it just means sort of a gift that has, it's not necessarily a direct cash gift. So there could be some other component parts to it. Legacy or estate gifts are just like what it sounds like. It's something that's in the estate and probably won't be realized until after that person has passed, or as Angel talked about, is it just Mr. Dake and he's a widower, or he's single, or is it Mr. and Mrs.? So a lot of times, in most cases, estates, it's when the last person is to pass is when it comes to the institution. So blended giving in one way, and I don't want to take away this from Angel, she's the expert, but it's maybe mixing some cash or stock or other assets along with an estate gift. So that allows you, because there was an earlier question, how do you measure success? Is it just gifts received, or is it gifts pledged? Maybe Angel, we got you on the phone. Maybe what's your thought about would you define just a blended gift?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head, Luke. I mean, I would think about it. I think Anthony was the one that asked the question. And first of all, I was looking to that question. I was like, I want that one. I would think of blended as exactly how you're describing it, Luke, right? So you're looking at it from all angles. It includes annual giving, potentially campaign giving. You're looking at some form of deferred or legacy gift. And layered on top of that, right? Offering to the donor that they could potentially give something other than cash, something other than their disposable cash to make that gift. And just, to follow on with what Chris was talking about in terms of, donors who are in their, 60s, 70s, and 80s, a really helpful question in engaging older donors, but I would argue really any donor when you're thinking about putting together a blended gift request, is to find out the answer to two questions, right? Do they need to trade a gift for income? Right? And that's especially important when you're thinking about older donors who are probably on some fixed income. Or do they need to address some tax liability? And that could be federal, state, local, or state rather. So, so getting answers to those two questions in as diplomatic a way as possible will help you then as the fundraiser understand how and what type of giving vehicle to offer and what assets might be available to suggest, making that gift request to them. And then the last thing I'll say about that with regard to blended proposals, and this goes with any sort of plan gift request, especially if it's refers to deferred or estate, or you're looking at assets other than cash, to pose these as options or ideas to the donor and encourage them then to go speak to their professional advisors to get confirmation if that is in fact a good idea for them, because what the donor might be thinking in terms of where they are financially and what they need to be thinking about may not necessarily be what their tax advisor, for instance, would recommend. So always present as options and ideas and encourage them to go speak to a financial professional to get confirmation on if it is in fact something that they can do.
And I'll pick up just on that thread, because there was another question in there, Angel, about how do you handle tax questions. So in general, even us as experts in the field, we never want to provide tax or legal advice to anybody, unless we are indeed somebody's accountant or lawyer. And in that case, you can do that if they're your client. But if not, you never necessarily know all the details. And so the idea is there's some basic tax things that you can share with people in terms of, like Angel mentioned, different levels. So, you'd say a gift like this to the church is tax deductible as provided to the extent provided by law, meaning you're going to need to talk to your own advisor about what's the best way to do that. So I think the main question is when we look at some of these gifts, sometimes it's just something as simple as, I want to make a gift either using some other resources that I have. That might be money in my checking account. It could be retirement accounts, as we heard about earlier, where folks have accrued a lot of funds. And it might be another asset, like, let's say, for example, somebody has a mountain cabin that they bought 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they used to use all the time. Now it's older, it's a little dumpy, no one really uses it as much anymore, but it is an asset. It's worth a certain amount of money. So in some cases, as you sat with a donor and asked them questions about, hey, what would you like to do to help St. Stephen's? And then you hear about what they're interested in doing. And maybe that's giving money to build the endowment that helps deferred maintenance and other projects. Maybe they love different ministries of the church. So they'd say, hey, I'd love to set up an endowment or set up a fund or make a gift that would support music ministry. So we'd have a source of funds to do something where we'd always be able to have something special about music. So sometimes it's asking the question and then figuring out, okay, based on what they're interested in, how might you direct them to do those different things? So main message in terms of, there was another question about, should we talk to other tax advisors or other folks that are kind of in the community? Yes, that's another great way to make folks know that that's how they can help. So to ask that simple question, perhaps they could consider doing, a planned or estate or some other type of gift that could help St. Stephen's. And just as I mentioned earlier, just even having some simple language of how. And you can do some of that in a very basic way. And then, like we mentioned earlier, then you can build from there and you can do something slightly more sophisticated. I want to be conscious of time. We're at 3:56. There's a ton of good questions in here. So we will answer all the questions. So we'll make sure to get to all of them. I think there was another good question. I think in talking about life insurance in terms of, that's another thing. Maybe Angel, I'm sort of hamstring you, but maybe like a 90-second version on life insurance.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the short answer is yes. Life insurance is a great option for certain donors to be able to gift that to the organization. Ideally, they're doing so in a way that they've signed the policy over, right, and have listed the parish or the diocese as the beneficiary. There are also, if you can believe it, some companies that exist to create life insurance policies as philanthropic gifts. So donors can take out a policy specifically with the intention of giving it to their church, sign it over, and then, and then it's sort of like a package deal, and it's all tied up and ready to go. So yes, definitely a good option.
And just to remind everybody, a lot of times when we're younger, we take those things out to make sure that if we do pass, that we have funds to take care of things like family, kids, college funds, the mortgage. But then by the time we get to be older, we either own our house outright, and we don't necessarily have some of those same financial pressures. So a lot of times it is a nice way where somebody can make a pretty substantial gift when they pass. And I think the biggest thing, the hurdle we're trying to get across, is by having these types of conversations regularly. Like there was somebody else who talked about blending sort of annual giving with planned giving. And even, how do you do that in a way where you're combining the two, where if you're going to have a conversation, why wouldn't you also talk about this? So if we think about our stewardship efforts, so as we roll into the fall, something, again, very simple you could do is you could make sure as we're talking to people, we could build into our normal approaches where we're asking people to make their commitments for the following year to the church. We could incorporate in our remarks and some of our printed materials, or even have a handout, how they also could make some type of planned gift or estate gift to help the parish. So it's just making people aware of that, and having things like legacy societies where you'd say, wonderful, these are all the people that have put St. Stephen's in their estate. There's 27 folks. And we're not saying how much they've given, but they've done it and they've let us know about that. And then, this would be one of those things where, in terms of what we learned today, a couple of things, and I will just take away, a lot of this you can get very sophisticated, but also we can boil it down where we'd say there's an opportunity to go out and engage with folks where they can make not only gifts today, but gifts that would benefit tomorrow and long after they're gone. So I think, one of the things at the small level, we can look simply as write a plan. As it says there, start small and build. So the biggest thing I would say to everybody is, don't get intimidated by, all the, at the highest end of the scale, but know that it could be really transformational and change what you're doing. But just something as simple as putting that down and making some measurable goals. And then, as Angel showed us, measure it from year to year to year. So as the vestry should examine what we're doing in terms of planned giving and how we do that. So quick takeaway, I want to thank everybody. We have lots of questions that we'll address all the questions. We'll get to everybody, make sure we answer it. But it is something that's really an interesting topic and has a lot of nuance, but you can do it simply, and then you can build up and eventually do it more sophisticated. So there's a range, no matter who you are, you definitely can do it. And the biggest thing is getting started. So I want to thank Angel, I want to thank Chris, and thank Joe Schwimmer, and everybody on the call today. This is great, and looks like we got a lot of good questions to answer in the next couple of days. So thank everybody for joining us today. And have a great rest of the week.